Kutvach, learning as is choshev for Shlema for Ilana Chai Basarach, and as Aliyah for the Neshama Meir Ben Elazar. Tvach Menachem, you ready?
Right.
Did you already put in your pizza delivery order?
I wish.
Yeah.
No.
Um, so we are on Daf Samech Vav Amid Beis, right where it says Ema Bekalim, about 20 lines down. Taner Rabban, Mashnemar Achel, Eshi Eshloi. This is the pasuk. Azet echel mikol asher b'mayim, kol asher lo. Actually, I should read the pasuk before we get started, even though this part is pretty straightforward. Let's just quickly look at the pasuk. This is as part of the parsha that talks about the animals that are kosher and non-kosher. So when we talk about uh, those that have the fish, it says this is Perik Yud Aleph, Pasuk Tes, and Vayikra and Shmini. Ezet toichelu mikol asher ba'amayim. This is what you should eat from everything that's in the water. Kol asher lo yisnape v'kashkashas b'mayim. Anything that has fins and scales in the water, bayamim, in the oceans, banacholim, in the rivers, oisam toichelu. That's what you should eat. So first of all, the pasuk is telling us, first of all, that those things that have fins and scales are kosher and those you can eat. And it puts a limiting principle. It says b'mayim bayam v'nechalim. It says in the oceans and in the rivers. Then the pasuk continues, v'chol asher ein lo yisnape v'kashkashas. Anything that doesn't have these two simanim, bayamim b'nechalim. Again, it says in the oceans and in the rivers. We call sheretz hamayim, from all those things that creep in the water. We call nefesh achaya, asher b'mayim, anything that's in the mayim, sheket seim lochem. Okay, so the pasuk says in both directions. It says both that you cannot eat. You can eat those things that have fins and scales, and you can eat those that don't. And in both of the psukim, it says if these things are found in the river, oceans, and the rivers. So first the Gemara is asking, Masha Shenamar Ochel. It said the first pasuk says, so Eshi Yeshloi, I'm sorry. So Tanarabban, Masha Shenamar Ochel Eshi Yeshloi, that we can eat those things that have this snape v'kaskashas. Shemeani al toichel she'enloi. I'll be able to deduce on that if it doesn't have it, you can't eat. Masha Nemer al toichel she'enloi, and the fact that it says you shouldn't eat that those that don't have the snape v'kaskashas. Shemeani ochel she'yeshloi would tell me that you could eat that does have. Well, lama shanon. So why did the pasuk have to say both of them? Laver love be'esev elois. Say to tell you that someone who eats a fish that does not have fins and scales is over not just in loisa say that you shouldn't eat those that don't have. You also have an essay that you should eat those that do. Okay, so the pasuk continues with its analysis. The Gemara continues with the analysis of the pasuk. The pasuk gets started off by saying ezet toichelu mikol asher b'mayim, and then that same pasuk ends off. Oisam toichelu. So it starts off the pasuk saying you should eat it, and it ends off saying you should eat it. So obviously that's unnecessary to say both. Ma tamid loimer shiachol hayel v'hitir b'mefurish v'hitir b'stam. Since the Torah was matir, now the Gemara doesn't say what it's being matir, but the Gemara is this Bryce is going to explain very soon what it's matir. So, like we said, there are two psukim. There's a pasuk that says you can eat those that have fins and scales, and you can't eat those that don't. But it had said bedafka on those things that are bayamim over nechalos, in the oceans and in the rivers. And what we darshan from that is that's only in things that are the oceans and rivers are both supplied with their own water, as well as that they're not limited to any specific place. They're sort of unlimited. On the other hand, water that's in a kli, even if a fish is produced from water that's in a kli, that's not it's very not similar to the oceans and the rivers, that is going to be allowed. So you're not going to need to have fins and scales. This is for us people in Flatbush. It's very hard to hear because about 10 years ago we got the rule that we can't drink water without filtering because of the little swimmies inside of it. But the halacha is that if the little swimmies originated in a cup, means it didn't come from a reservoir, from the ocean, or from a river, but originated in a cup. And the Gemara is, I think, basically assuming spontaneous generation, that it grows from inside of the water. That would be mutter to eat in spite of its lack of fins and scales. What we can't eat is slightly different. It's not really coming from the kli, it's coming from the water source. So so we have a limud. As we're going to see, there's going to be different graduations of what is considered mutter, what's included as mutter in this heter of something that germinated, that grew, that generated outside of the ocean and the rivers. And so Torah is matter that. So the Gemara is saying, since the Torah was matter, it both as far as the pasuk saying that you can eat with fins and scales, and the pasuk also saying you cannot eat without fins and scales. And the Gemara is going to later on, all the way in an amud later, is going to explain which one is sasam and which one is mefurish. One of those two limudim, either the positive instruction that you can eat with fins and scales from yam nechalis, or the one that you can't eat from yam nechalis without fins and scales. We're going to see later which one is considered stam and which is mefurish. One of them is more explicit, and the other one is learned out. So, tam lo v'shiyachal hayel v'hitter mefurish v'hitter b'stam. Mak sheter mefurish lehitter el b'kelim, mafka sheb'stam lehitter el b'kelim. I would say that it applies both legabi the essay and the lois essay, that you're only going to be mutter with kelim. Minayin l'rab is boiris sichanum aris. But how do I know? That would only tell you kelim. How do I know to go one step up of that? That means the furthest thing from a yamim and nechalis, from oceans and rivers, is a kli. A kli is not attached to the ground, and a kli doesn't get its water from a natural source. But the next thing that's least like the yamim and nechalis is boiris sichanum aris, which is pits and trenches and canals and caves, that a person again can drink from them and not be concerned about little fishies, little swimmies that have been generated within them. They're similar to the kalim. They're just like the kalim, the water in the kalim, you're not chayav for drinking without snapiv kaskashras. How do I know that extends not just to kalim, but even to independent pits and ponds and things that are not supplied from springs?
Isn't that closer? In other words, if we really went to the other extreme of Kalim that is mutter, why would I think that the in-between stage is not mutter?
We're going to see. Why would I think it's not mutter?
Yeah.
Maybe it's more similar to the yamim and the chalis. How do I know to include it with the kalim? Kalim are fully off the ground. They're separated from the ground. So that is very different than what the Torah said, that you need fins and scales. Maybe this one step up is more similar to yam and nechalis. So we say tam and lima. That means that if you think about it, it makes sense. Whenever there's a miyat, we're remayit the least possible. We have a limud. We learn the least chiddush possible. We don't extend the limud more than the smallest limud. So how would I know to extend it to baris sichon baris? Tam and lima techelu mikol asher b'mayim. The Torah says, Techelu mikol asher b'mayim. So that's what this pasuk is coming to tell you, that it's not just the kalim, but also barim sichas and amaris, that you can drink water with small animals that were generated in the water without fins and scales. Heichen hitter bekalim. The Gemara goes back and says, we didn't say it, but where did we see that there's a heter for kalim? That you're saying we have a lima to tell you not just by kalim. The chsiv ezet heichelim mikol asher b'mayim bayam mechalim. Hud bayam mechalim hudachi islay achal the leslay teichel. Habekalim avagav the leslay achal. We make a very simple drasha. The Torah said, don't eat it don't eat a fish without, or you should eat a fish with fins and scales in the yamim and the chalos. It's coming to tell you, but if it's not in the yamim nechel, which is the bare minimum of kalim, even though it doesn't have the fish and scales, you could eat it. Correct, Gemara. How do you know to make the drasha like that? Ema bekalim, afal gav the islay teichel. Maybe it's going to tell you the other way around. It's not telling you that the biyam and the chalos you can only eat with fins and scales, and in the kalim you could eat even without them. Maybe it's going to tell you even with fins and scales, a fish that was generated in a kli, you cannot eat. It's not coming to be mater. It's coming to be machmir, that you can't eat even with fins and scales. That's what the Torah is telling you, b'yam and chalos. Only yam and chalos to fin and scales matter, but not outside of them. So since the Torah did not just tell us a positive statement that if it has fins and scales, you can eat in the yam and chalos, but it also said anything that doesn't have fins and scales, b'yam and chalim, that mikol sheretz mayim b'yam and chalim, the leslay loy teichel habekalim afagav the leslay ochel. When it's phrased as a negative commandment, there's no way to infer from that. But if it does have fins and if it doesn't have fins and scales, you could eat it. The Torah just said that we limited that which you cannot eat without fins and scales to yam and chalis. So that could only be telling you. But if it isn't a kli, then you could eat it even without fins and scales. Okay.
So basically, if a shrimp was born in a pond,
When you say born, it's like it has to be that it was generated in the pond. Like maybe if it was like a microscopic egg that was laid there, but if there's an egg that was laid there by a shrimp that you see there, that's not spontaneously generated. We're going with a Talmudic concept that it's very difficult to see it reflected in real life, because biologically, I don't think there's really any such conception as spontaneous generation. Everything comes from something else. Like you're talking about a shrimp. A shrimp comes from a mommy shrimp. I don't know what they do. They lay eggs, they give birth to them. But that's not spontaneously generated. That's born. And that would certainly be awesome. Right? Yeah, it's said in Rashi, but it's hard to find it. Zok the Gemara. Do you say achal lesser achal b'kelim afagav lesser achal ever b'kelim afagav the islay loytech? Let's like that. Let's say let's say kasher mayam mechol mechol mayam loytech. B'kelim afagav islay achal. Fact the Gemara. Why are we looking the limit this way? Ve'ema b'mayim klal b'yam mechalim prat. Let's say the Torah says a general rule: anything b'mayim you shouldn't drink, you shouldn't eat unless it has a snap eva kashkashas. And then it says b'yam mechalim, which is a prat. Klalu prat. Whenever you have a klalu prat, ein b'chlal shema b'prat. That's a very restrictive rule that you can only say those things that are in the prat. Yam l'chalim in mi'itzim v'charitzim loy. So I would tell you you could only eat in the yamim and the chalim, but mi'itzim v'charitzim, this is the third stage. So if you're going to go from the most similar to ocean and a river. The next stage would be nitzim charitzim, which are like springs and ditches that are ponds that get their water from a natural source, that it bubbles from inside the earth. That's very similar. The only difference between a river and an ocean is that it's limited, that the water doesn't go wherever it doesn't keep going to different places. It's limited in size, in scope, but it's most similar. So I would say, let's learn that nitzim and charitzim, even if they don't have fins and scales, so it would not be just kalim and not just bayrusichin and ma'aris, which don't get water from the ground, but even nitzim and charitzim, which get water coming from springs, would also be excluded from the din of requiring a snapi v'kaskeshes on those things that are generated within them. So tomorrow, but mayim chazav kolol. No, it's not a klalu prat. It's a klalu pratu klal, because the Torah says, first it says ezetechelu, and then it says mikol asher b'mayim, kol asher lo yisnabe v'kaskeshes. So it says b'mayim, and it says kol asher lo yisnabe v'kaskeshes. So it says b'mayim chazav kolol. Correct, tomorrow. What kind of klalu pratu klal? The two klalim are ezetechelu and b'mayim, and then it says afterward the prat. So it's really a klalu prat. Whenever you have two klals next to each other, that's not a problem. It doesn't have to be sequenced as a klalu pratu klal. Even if it's a klalu prat, we can move things around to make it into klalu. If you have two klalos at the beginning, you can make it into a klalu pratu klal. B'mayim klal, b'yam v'cholim prat, b'mayim chazav v'kolol. Right? The pasuk says, "Zeta chelim mikol asher b'mayim, kol asher knapi v'kaskes b'mayim b'yam v'cholim oisem teichelu." So even though it says the second b'mayim before b'yam v'cholim, we can still make it a klalu pratu klal. Klalu pratu klal, iyatadon elike'ena prat. When you have a klalu pratu klal, then it has to be similar to the prat. Not like we had said by a klalu prat, that it excludes everything other than the most similar, except for what it says in the prat, nothing else included. But over here we say ke'ena prat. Ma prat mfurish mayim noivim, just like the klal, the prat over here of yamim and cholos, of oceans and rivers, is talking about things that are sourced with bubbling water. It gets water from the springs of the earth. Av kol mayim noivim. It also includes what were they called again? And the itzim and the charitzim that the water is supplied by springs. Those will also be included in what the pasuk says, that you need to have fins and scales on spontaneously generated organisms. So my rabbi charitzin itzin lisura, or my miet bayrusichin amaris lahetera. So I'm going to leave it that, like we had started off, that kalim and bayrusichin ma'aris are mutter, and charitzin itzim are aser. Frag the Gemara ve'ema ma'avrat mavurish mayim godlin al gabe karka af kol mayim godlin al gabe karka, or ma rabbi afilu bayrusichin ma'aris lisura. Why do I know that the distinguish when we're saying klalu pratu klal, that we're saying it's like the prat, that the water bubbles from the earth? Maybe it includes anything that's on the earth, that's in a boundary on the earth. But the only thing that's excluded is kalim. But everything else, even a pond or a ditch, that would be aser. Umay miyat kalim. So they're saying that's what the limit of teichlu is, coming to add on something to kalim. So we start with the klalu pratu klal, and then we have teichelu, which the klalu pratu klal theoretically could have just meant kalim, but we have the teichelu to include bayrusichin amaris. So just like the last Gemara, that's the first explanation in the Brisa, but then we have the Rei Rishmal Tana, they have a slightly different version. But mayim shtei pa'amim. Again, the Torah says twice mayim, which were used for two klalos. But he says, Eze klalu prat. It's not a klalu prat. Ele ribu umiyat. This is a ribu umiyat, which we've had this format of the Gemara several times, where we have the machlokes. Do we learn with the klalu prat to klalu or a ribu umiyat? B'mayim riba, b'yamul cholim miyat, b'mayim chazav riba. Riba umiyat to riba, riba hakol. And like we said before, when you have a riba miyat and riba, everything is included except for one thing, right? That's the way we always say it. It means everything is included, but obviously you have a miyat, something is memuyat, so we just memayat the smallest thing. My rabbi, charitzin and itzin lisura, or my miyat, barisichn amaris lahatera. In fact, the Gemara, what? We're not really following that rule. Our rule is that we always mamayit the minimum amount. The minimum amount would be just to be mamayit kalim. Why are we also being mamayit barisichn amaris that they're also that they're mutter? I'm sorry, barisichn amaris lisura. I'm sorry, right? Why are we also including barisichn amaris latera? Ema my riba barisichn amaris lisura or my meat kalim. So the Gemara again, im kei toichlu mayahani lei. If that was the case, again, we'd be left with the same problem of what is Teichlu coming to tell you. So Teichlu is coming to tell you it's not just the bare minimum. In addition to Kalim, it's also my letera barisichn amaris. Fact the Gemara, the Epachana. Let's say it's saying the exact thing. Meaning, if we're talking about this is only a kasha, this is not in klal upratu klal, because klal upratu klal was saying a klal, it's also, and then when mafaret, only this is also, but not something else. But if you're learning as a ribui miyat and ribui, so then there's no cheshbonus in it. We're just saying we're mamayit one thing and we're marba anything, everything else. So let's say that maybe bayrisichad and ma'ayros are going to be aser, and the nitzan and charitzim are going to be mutter. Why are you picking that on a ribui and miyat to choose one? So the market, the Tani Matzah the Tani Matzah by Yehuda, my Rosh L'Rabbis Baris Sichon Ma'aris Later L'Hoitzi Charitzon Itzon Lisura, Ma'abini Baris Sichon Ma'aris Shein Atzurim Kekelim, because they're similar to Kalim in that they're closed off. They're not, they're not unlimited. We're saying it's true. It's not. We're not picking winners over here based on a svara. But we're doing it on a svara which is similar to Kalim. The Torah already said Kalim, and that's the Kuli Alma, the least chiddush, the most furthest away from the oceans and the rivers. And then we have Techelu to add on to that. So we're going to add on to it the thing that's most similar to Kalim. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to what we started all the way at the beginning. That we said there was Manda Mamar who says you learn out Sasum. That one is Sasam and one is Mefurish. That means that the din of Kalim is in one place, it's very clear that Kalim are excluded. In the other case, it's not as clear. And it was talking about the two parts of the psukim, the part where we said positively that you can only eat those things that have fins and scales, and the part that we said that you can't eat things that don't have fins and scales. And one of those is considered Sasam, one is Mefurish. We're asked which one is Sasam, which is Mefurish. One says the first part of the pasuk, which says that which has fins and scales is mutter by yamam nechalis. That's mefurish that kalim are excluded. Ve'ein loy sasam, and the other part of the pasuk is sasam. V'chadam ve'ein loy mefurish v'yesh loy sasam. The other one says the other way around. My time in the manda amma yesh loy mefurish. Why does one manda amma say yesh loy is clear that it's excluding kalim? Amalach minahu dekam mishderu kalim. Because that's where we can see clearly that kalim are mutter. That means that the way Rashi explains is that the oisoi techelu is right after we say yamim and necholas. So therefore, that's telling you that only by where it says this you should eat, it says immediately after the yamim and necholas oisoi techelu. So it's coming to tell you right away that that which you could eat is only in yam and necholis, but not the thing that's not similar to, which is kalim. On the other hand, when it says oisam loiter chelu, the things that don't have snabe bekatz kashas, it says that it doesn't say next to yam necholis. That it says, let me see. V'chol asher ein lo snapi v'kaskas b'yamim v'chol nikol sheretz hamayim v'shachai ashemayim sheketz heim locha. Doesn't say that you shouldn't eat it right next to b'yamim v'cholim. It says it v'chol asher b'mayim. So the exclusion of kalim is not together with the isser. And my time in the Manda Amar ein la mefurish. And what about the Manda who says the other way around? That the pasuk that says you should not eat those things that are missing fins and scales, because that one is necessary in order to tell you what the din is talking about. Because we had asked when he first said we learn out kalim from the mashmayis of the pasuk. We said maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it's coming to tell you that things that are in kalim you can't eat even with fins and scales. So we said no, that can't be because of the second part of the pasuk. It's possible to make that mistake on the first part, but not on the second part. So since the second part is what's necessary in order for us to be able to make the limud, that's the one that's considered mefurish. So that's why we say that the second part, the negative instruction in the pasuk, is the mefurish. Not that it makes a difference really, but the Gemara just wanted to clarify. Rav Huna said, "Lelifshish in shichri tzavisa beorto." A person should not pour beer to filter it through wooden. They used to use wooden sticks because beer didn't go through cloth well, so they would use wooden sticks to filter the beer. You shouldn't do it at night. Dilma parish la'ayel mitzavaisa v'hadanofa lekasa. This din that we said that little buggies that don't have fins and scales are mutter if they're in a kli, right? If they're generated in a kli, that's only as long as they're in the kli. But if they leave the kli, it's only while they're in the place where they were generated. If they go out, then they're no longer mutter. So if this gets filtered, these bugs get filtered out, and then after they're filtered out, they fall back into the kli. Since they became asur from being separated from the water, they're going to remain asur even if they fall back in. Therefore, don't do it at night because you won't see the bugs coming in. Once it leaves the water, it becomes a sheretz alaretz, which is awesome. How could you ever be saivich on this heter that if a organism is generated without fins and scales in a kli, that it's mutter, maybe it crawled onto the wall and then fell back into the water? It's like, no, hasam hainu revise. That's where it grows. It grows in the kli, and going onto the wall of the kli does not make it al aretz. It's part of where it naturally lives, and it's not going to be considered that it became awesome. So tomorrow minot temra. What do we know such a thing? The Tanya minayin l'rabis baris yichna ma'arish shoycha v'shoysam hen ve'ein nimna. How do we know that if you have little organisms in pits and ditches and caves, you could drink from them, you could bend down and drink from them, and you don't have to stop yourself because of the organisms? Like we said before, we learned that from Teichelu, that the baris yichna ma'arish are also matir without snapi v'kaskashas. The Torah says you could eat baris yichna ma'arish. But how could you ever do that? Maybe it crawled up the side of the pit and then fell back in, and then it was already hasheretz al aretz. So since that's the way it's created, that's where it lives, that's not considered that it ever was separate. So too, with the person filtering the beer, it will be considered that's the way it's grown. Tanya de Misayel, I'll bring you a riot to what you're saying. That's coming to include if you filtered from your some shrotzim that grew in your wine, and you filtered it out, that it's going to be asa. It's only because it got filtered out. And shari, we're not worried about that it's crawling up on the sides of the kli to make it asa. Amar Shmuel, kishus, a cucumber, shetliya ba'avya, that got wormy while it was attached to the ground, asur mishum hasheretz hasheretz al aretz. It's asur al sheretz that crawls on the ground. If just like we said about Eloi Snape v'Kashkeshes is um uh why is that? The isser of animals, of these shrotzen, is only with a sheretz al aretz. The Torah says, sheretz al aretz, it has to have been on the ground. So if you have a little worm that grew inside of a cucumber that was never on the ground, let's say you picked a cucumber and a worm grew in it, and you ate the cucumber with the worm, it's talking about, I think, a tiny worm. I don't think it means something that's a berry of a but if you eat it, it's going to be mutter. But if it was still attached to the ground, so then it's considered like the kishus, the cucumber is part of the ground, and then it was already a sheretz al arch, which is going to be awesome. So it says, Amar Shmuel, kishush etliya ba'avya, when it becomes wormy while it's attached to the ground, asur mishum sheretz al arch. Le misayel, I bring a rai. The tani chada, al arch loisi it's hazizin sheba'adashim. We said in the Brisa that Torah says Hasheretz ala Aretz, that's coming to be Motzei, the little small bugs that are in Adashim, in lentils, the Seyatushim, Shebeklisim, and the other small bugs that are in different types of beans, but Torah Shebetmarim, and the worms that get in dates, Shebegoigeres, and in the figs. So all these things are excluded. If you have unattached beans and figs and dates that gets worms in them, they're not going to be awesome. This doesn't really help us, you understand, because if we don't know, the only way you can really be sure that things didn't grow while they were attached to the ground is if they're more than 12 months old, which, we're not going to get our romaine lettuce that's more than 12 months old detached from the ground. So in any case, all these things are going to be mutter. We said in the sheretz haaretz is coming to include the worms that grow on the stems of olives and on the stems of kfanim. My love, both are talking about that they grow in the pera. The ones that we said are usher are talking about while they grew, while they were attached to the ground. The ones that are mutter, the ones that were not attached to the ground. Somewhere loy, it's not a raya, lav dafka, like Shmuel loy, aidi avia. Maybe Shmuel is incorrect. They're both talking about when they're attached to the ground, but it could still be mutter. Like kasha, haba pera, hoiba il negufo. One was actually in the pera, and that's where there's a heter that's not considered sheretz al aretz. But the other one is talking about where it was out of the pera and on the stem, which is not part of the pera, and that's considered sheretz al aretz. But in Chanami, even if it's attached to the ground, unlike Shmuel, it will still be mutter because it's not sheretz al aretz, it's still inside of the fruit. Why did it talk about specifically on the stems? Shmamina. Boy Rav Yosef. So, in any case, we've definitely come to the conclusion, according to Shmuel, he'll agree that if a date or a fruit is separated from the ground and you get worms that grow in it, that generate inside of it, they're going to be mutter. And according to the other mandamer, it will be even if it's attached to the ground, as long as it's inside of the fruit, it's going to be mutter.
And so we wanted to make a raya, right? And we said, no, it's not a raya because
It could be even saying, unlike Shmuel that wanted to say that whenever it's attached to the ground, there's no heter of Asher. It's going to be sheretz al aretz because it's attached to the ground, even inside the fruit. But the other Malnama says, no, it's not necessarily true like Shmuel is saying. It could be that even when it's attached to the ground, if it's inside. And that it's going to be mutter? Why did we say by the gefanim and the zaysim that it's aser? That's because the bugs left the fruit and they were on the stems rather than inside the fruit. This heter of Asheretz al aretz is only while it's still inside the fruit.
But if it's on the tree itself, when it's on the tree itself,
once it left the security of the fruit, then it's like any other bug. Heter is only while it's in the fruit. So then the Gemara is going to ask a sequence of questions about what's considered to still be on the fruit. Harshu Mesa Mahu. What happens if the bug left the fruit, but it died before it hit the ground? So then maybe I would say it's not Shayretz al Aretz because it was never Shayretz al Aretz. It didn't have the ability to creep around. It was already dead when it left the fruit. Maybe that should also be mutter. Miktsasa Mahu. What happened if part of the bug left the fruit, but most of it is still inside? Is that going to also be aser? So la'avira oila Mahu. And what happens if it left the whatchamacallit? It left the fruit, but it's still alive. That means before we said that if it died, so it never was sharetz al aretz. But what happens if it left the fruit and it didn't die, but you ate it before it reached the ground? Is that going to also be mutter? So Gemara teku. All these are tekus. Boy Ravashi. Legag tamramau. What happens if it didn't leave the security of the tamar? It's still on the actual date. Legag garanisa mau. And even you'll say once it leaves the date that it's going to be outside and it's going to be sharetz al aretz. What if it grew in the pit of the date and it just went out of the pit, but it's still inside of the date? Or mitamar letamar mau. What if it went from one day to another? Is it all these are considered that they were meshaketz al aretz? So Gemara take all of them is take. We'll stop over here. We'll finish the parak Be'ez Hashem tomorrow. Motzei Shabbos, the last
Thank
Motzei
you.
Shabbos before the 9 days. I'm sure everyone wants to make a late night barbecue tonight. I don't want to stop you.
I can talk. Thank you.
Just
Good luck.
remember not to